Hi, I'm Ed Amoroso from Tag Cyber, and I'm here with Peter Smith, who is the founder and CEO of a Boston-based cybersecurity company called Edgewise. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Nice to see you in New York.
Oh, it's great to be here.
Well, we're going to hear all about Edgewise. I want to learn about the company, about technology. Let's start with kind of just real briefly what the company does, and then we'll swing back and try and understand how you got there. But just in a nutshell, what does Edgewise do?
In a nutshell, we do zero trust microsegmentation, which is really just about reducing the attack surface of services within the cloud and data center.
I think a lot of people watching are going to say, oh good, because I don't get zero trust, right? Probably hear it every day, and then people have different definitions, right? So we'll get to that. Let's go back and help me understand kind of how'd you get to this? Where did Edgewise come from, and what was sort of the drive to build the company?
I used to run infrastructure and security, and this was in the early days of AWS, and we were building out dynamically scaling systems. And that was becoming a pretty big challenge with address-based controls. And at one point,
the scaling.
Yeah, the auto-scaling, the expansion and contraction. How do you manage very strict policies when everything is changing? Truth be told, I was having a can of soda and I noticed that it had a serial number on the side of it. And I was like, that's weird that a can of soda would have a serial number. And what I realized is everything has a unique identity, even a can of soda. So if we could grab the identities of software and devices and people and containers, then couldn't we orchestrate policy around identity instead of addresses and ports? That's what Edgewise does. We make it so it's highly dynamic, auto-scaling with very little administrative overhead.
Inventory being a real important part of that, knowing all the players.
That's a great point. If you don't have identity, you can't do this. And identity is rooted in inventory. And we discover all of the inventory and identity properties of your devices, your containers, and your software automatically.
So one day you up and quit your job and start Edgewise, or is it something different than that?
Well, there was an evolution. We got to Edgewise. We were building other solutions. I built a distributed storage company previously, and then ultimately I just couldn't let this idea go. And I paired up with my co-founder Harry Sverdlov, who was really one of the pioneers of application whitelisting, which is all about identity. And I said, why don't we use identity to verify communications, every communication everywhere, based on the identity of the software and device.
Interesting, which is a good entree to this concept of zero trust. Now, I'm going to guess that you lead the league in getting asked, what is zero trust? Probably the first thing people ask you. Help us when people do ask you that. What do you generally, how do you explain zero trust to somebody? And it's a tech audience, but in simple terms, what do you usually say?
Yeah, I think people expect zero trust to be a technology, and they're surprised when they hear it's a philosophy, it's a framework,
a concept,
right? It's a concept, right? And if we take all of the architecture and all of the words away and just boil it down to a simple concept, it's to say that for the longest time we have blindly trusted communications or access by default. And there's no better example of that than the zone-based firewall. You've got a untrust outside the zone and a trust inside the zone. Perimeter. And really what zero trust is to say that there is no default trust anymore. It's about verification. It's about authorization of every connection, of every interaction, based on something that is more immutable, more identifiable than an address or a port or a protocol.
Seems depressing in a sense, right? Like you're on your own? Is that a way of thinking of it? Or is that too negative?
I try to think of it in the positive head.
Because if what you were depending on wasn't working, then you're moving forward. Maybe that's a better way of thinking of it?
Exactly. It's really just about a continuous process of reasserting what it is that's interacting, based on what it is, not how it's interacting. Addresses and ports, that's really just how two things communicate. What is communicating is a piece of software and a device on both sides of the connection. Zero trust just says we're going to verify that, and we're going to do it continuously.
Interesting. Now tell me about the platform, because I'm guessing somebody gets excited about the concept, they like your story, and they say, okay, well, I've got this bank, or I've got this manufacturing company, and we have a perimeter, and we got some cloud, and what do I do? What are kind of some of the steps that people go through on this journey from not doing zero trust to trying to approach it? Maybe the journey is the end. Just moving is the right thing. But what do people do? What are some steps that come to mind?
I think the big question people have is, how do I isolate workloads? What is the boundary of the workload?
Yeah.
What are my workloads?
Yeah.
Right. Again, it comes back to inventory.
Workload could be app, it could be collection of
database.
apps, it could be a business unit.
That's right.
Whatever,
yeah, it could be. You could say that it's a subgroup of users and their laptops.
Got it.
It could be a distributed auto-scaling tier of a broader application. So for instance, let's say you had a multi-tiered application where each tier scaled out independently. You had a proxy tier, an application tier, and a database tier.
All separate workloads.
Each one of those could be considered a separate workload, and then the entirety of that could be also another segment.
Yeah.
So we help them to automate the process of defining those boundaries and defining the policies that make it so that they can be protected with this zero trust concept.
The boundaries are going to be access points for the most part, like either network accessibility or something like that. Like if I have a workload that's an app and I want to define the boundary, then I'm sort of defining the ins and outs of that app. Do I have that right?
I think you do.
Ports and protocols or something like that?
Yeah, so in the world of Edgewise, what we would do, let's take Active Directory as an example.
Yeah.
I should note that there's a machine learning system that automates this process. So the machine learning system will identify the boundary of Active Directory, meaning all of the Active Directory servers. That's the largest segment.
Oh, okay, the servers, right?
Yep.
AD.
The physical servers or virtual servers. It identifies those objects and put them into what we call a host segment.
Step one.
Step one.
Got it.
Now it's inventory to all of those systems. And what it needs to do is to look at various pieces of software running on them to identify consistent access patterns, consistent software identities, and it groups those into sub-boundaries. So for instance, the LDAP listener, LSAS, it'll identify LSAS across all of those systems and any other services that make LDAP accessibility possible and put that into a separate segment. And it builds these application level segments and then automatically builds the access policies to allow client access into them. So let's say you've got a desktop that needs to authenticate to Active Directory. It'll automatically build the policy that says the LSAS process on all of these desktops and servers is allowed to interact with the LSAS process on all of the servers.
Yeah. How do I know the policy is not going to break something?
So there's really two dimensions of how policy adapts automatically. The first thing is when you upgrade software. How do I know if changing the identity of the software through an upgrade is acceptable? We've actually been awarded a patent on that, which allows us to automatically apply policies to new instances of that software, even if they are not identical. The second one is horizontal scaling. So let's say, for instance, you add another Active Directory server. The way these segments are defined by the ML engine, the new AD server is recognized as being part of that segment, automatically pulled in, and every policy that was applied to the segment is now inherited by that new AD server. And that's done without any administrative intervention.
Sounds like this would be relatively straightforward for new things. Like I'm rolling a new capability or I'm upgrading. What do you do with an old legacy thing that's kind of a kludge, not well designed and kind of a mess?
It's a great question.
Do you leave it alone or do you?
No, I think that's really where ML shines. The institutional knowledge built up about these applications leaves companies regularly, average tenures somewhere in the 3-year period. And with those departures goes the information about how these legacy applications function. And I think in this industry of, or segment of microsegmentation, we really need to reframe what it is that we're trying to accomplish. Are we trying to understand every interaction of every piece of software and device in the entire environment? if that's the goal, I would say that it's impossible. No individual could understand that level of complexity for a moderately sized organization. But if we recast the problem as a platform that helps you make risk-based decisions about access, then machine learning can automate that process. Machine learning can look at a legacy system and say, well, this jar talks to this database. These things are known to be good, and we see regular patterns of interactions. There's no bad behaviors. There's no bad reputations of any of the software interacting. So let's codify that in policy. That's what ML systems and Bayesian analysis is good at, and we can leverage that to effectively lock down the access of legacy applications without administrators really needing to fully understand what that application does.
Interesting. Can you do zero trust security without cloud? A lot of people equate the two, right? People will say zero trust. Oh, you mean put everything in the cloud? And I always say when I hear that, I kind of wince because I don't know if that's right. It seems like cloud is pretty fundamental to an implementation, but I don't know.
I see that really in two different dimensions. One is why are you doing zero trust? At the end of the day, going back to the definition of zero trust is supposed to help us deliver business services confidently in an inherently untrustworthy environment. You have no confidence in the ownership, the integrity, or who is on the network that you need to deliver business services from. So the cloud, of course, is not your network. You don't own it. You don't manage it. It exists, but it's not yours. So zero trust enables people who are embracing the cloud to confidently deliver services in an inherently untrusted environment. So I think they are hand in hand in that respect. And then the other part of it is I'm of the belief that you cannot truly accomplish zero trust microsegmentation without the aid of machine learning or other high-level analytics. And those types of platforms are computationally extremely heavy. So for instance, our ML engine will scale up to hundreds of systems for brief periods of time to do these computations very quickly. And I think the sort of dynamism that we're talking about here, scaling up to hundreds of instances to do a ML run and then come back down, that is inherently a cloud workload. And doing it elsewhere would be it would be costly and complex.
Yeah. So the benefit here is flexibility. Like you end up in a case where device to cloud is the same at Starbucks and the airport and the office and at home on the road.
Inside the cloud.
That's the beauty. That's the Google Beyond Corp sort of, they help to drive the concept because they popularized the idea that maybe you could scatter workloads and you don't really need a perimeter. I mean, is that sort of, so yeah, we do security, so we would tout a lot of, protection issues, but for just anybody doing computing, if they hear that their company's going zero trust, I think the word flexible and mobile, there's a lot of really good things. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think there's really two very complementary models. There's the Beyond Corp model, like you said, popularized by Google, and then there's what I think is fairly well known as the Kindervag model. So John Kindervag, who created this concept of zero trust, created it based on microsegmentation, the idea that today we've got these broad trust zones that allow attackers to move laterally and freely within cloud and data center environments, and that we need to do away with that concept, and instead we need to put boundaries around data and applications, around workloads. And so shifting from these big open flat networks to much smaller, tightly bounded segments around data and workloads. And so the two of these models are actually very complementary. I take my data center or my cloud workload and I segment it down to its constituent parts. And then using zero trust remote access, I grant access into those workloads using identity verification. So the two models fit nicely together, I would say.
And that's a little insight, I presume, into how Edgewise platform works. Right?
That's precisely how we do what we do.
What you're describing is more or less the experience. How's business? I would imagine good.
Phenomenal. I think the awareness of this category has catapulted it.
Yeah.
And even microsegmentation, I think microsegmentation has, as a concept, has been around for a long time, but what we're seeing today is we've got the distributed technologies in distributed firewalling tech, like what Edgewise uses, as well as the analytics that really over the past maybe decade and a half, we've seen machine learning come to a level where you can actually apply it to solve real business problems from an IT operations perspective. And so bringing these two together, I don't think there is a time besides today where you could have accomplished that. Yeah. So it's a great time to be in this space and to embrace the technology.
If we swing out 5 years, are you and I going to be cracking up that we even had to explain zero trust?
Oh man,
or will this just be the new normal?
You know what's funny? I'm going to contradict exactly what I said 2 seconds ago. And we talk about how we do it because that is the present definition of what is differentiated about it. I think much like we used to talk about what big data actually meant, and now when you say big data, most people just sort of understand intuitively what that means. And I really do believe in a matter of 5 years, probably sooner, when you say zero trust, there's a lot of confusion today, and it requires, in some cases, laborious explanation. But in 5 years, I think it'll be as intuitive as saying big data.
It's like you're having fun running the company.
Oh, I wouldn't do anything but.
We've been, between our prep and the interview, you've been smiling the whole time. You look like you're just really having fun, and just it looks like you're living your dream.
I've been dreaming about this for about 6 years now, and building it for 3.5, and it's been an amazing journey.
I hope people watching call your team and get the pitch on how they might benefit from this.
I'd love it.
Let me know who calls, and I'll be interested to hear.
I will.
Thanks for stopping by.
Thank you.
Great to hear. And we'll see you next time.